Everybody, welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 50 of Van Halen Stories. Today, my number 50 is with an incredible guest. John Shanks is with me today. John Shanks recorded, and produced actually the Van Halen Different Kind of Truth album, which we have here. So wonderful.
Good choice.
Right? Wonderful album. You guys probably know John has worked extensively with Bon Jovi as a producer, but also as his guitar player. John's one of the biggest selling producers of all time, like from Melissa Etheridge, where you started out, to Michelle Branch and all the different artists you work with. You had an amazing career that's like unbelievable. So people that don't know that need to check out your discography. Our former guest, Phil X, works with him all the time and with Bon Jovi as well. And we had a good time with Phil last time he was on here. So really excited about having you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Like last minute like that too. It's cool.
That's the best way to do it with me. It's like, how about now?
All right. Sounds good. First of all, we were all surprised by that album, of course, coming out at all, because we thought that would never happen. One of the interesting things that I found out researching on this channel is the demo tapes that you eventually got in your hands, or that Van Halen got in their hands, of their early demos that Eddie collected. You know those demos, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he came to, I had the greatest phone message that I don't have anymore. And it was on my old phone. And it was basically Eddie saying, okay, here we go. It's time. We're going to do this. And he goes, you better be ready. And he came to my house. And he showed up, in true Eddie fashion, showed up in like a Ferrari, rolled into the driveway with a box full of, cassettes, DATs, CDs. And we had everything set up so we could play everything, old digital, DATs and cassettes and CDs. And so that took a minute to set up to get it right. And then just went through, as a fan, just to sit there and hear music that nobody's probably ever heard, just licks and ideas and starts. And he was so open and forthcoming in the sense that I would say, God, where was that recorded? And he'd go, that was in the basement at Dave's house. And I said, what is that? What are you playing through? And he's like, I think a Fender Bassman.
Yeah.
Like a blackface Bassman. I think that's what he said. I said, where's Dave? He goes, upstairs doing his homework.
Doing his homework?
I think he said getting a sandwich or doing homework, maybe,
right.
And so, and just kind of eventually he said, we never put this out. This was a great start on something, or here's a version that's out there that people, but it's not really it wasn't a completed song. And, the idea originally was, if I recall, was to do some of that and then have a couple new ones.
Right.
So we went through until we found, a body of work that felt like an album's worth of material. So we had a lot to go through, and but in a sense, so they had to resurrect that material. But Dave is the one who really had a lot of work to do, because he has to write a whole record, basically, lyrically. So these guys, God bless them, were finding little diamonds musically, and then we would kind of craft, or they would, and sometimes we would kind of work on the arrangements and stuff like that to make them feel like a song.
Right.
So it's, and you can't worry about what people are going to think, the internet and everything. You get,
sure.
Someone's going to be like, that lick came from '74
Right.
bootleg B-side from fucking Gazzari's, and then they played it twice at the Starwood and once at a party when everyone was on Quaaludes in the Valley and Pasadena. It's like, come on, man.
I'm surprised you hadn't heard it this last few weeks, because when those, I don't know if you saw any of these leaks of videos that came out from the early the 70s, late.
Yes,
70s.
I've been watching those.
Okay. So one of those was Down in Flames, which became Tattoo.
Sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen comments about it or anything.
Yeah. They actually played it live on tour in 78, which was,
Right.
I didn't even realize they had played it live on that tour.
I mean, send it to me. I'd love to hear it,
Yeah. All right.
I mean, right. So you're going to get, people just love to be critics, and that's, in life, you just got to ignore, you just got to stay in your lane and just keep moving forward. And you know what, as a songwriter it's your prerogative to do whatever you want with your material.
Right.
I've had this conversation with Bruce Springsteen, and I said, when you were writing this, have you ever taken stuff from other songs? He's like, oh, please. I take a line from this song and a guitar lick from this song. And, I've certainly done it where I've played on sessions for people over the years because I was a studio musician. And, you play a lick on somebody's record, or sometimes that record never even comes out. But I'll be damned if I'm not going to use that lick for my own stuff. I came up with the lick. Sure. And that record, that person got dropped or whatever, So I think it's fluid. I think it's Clay, and he's the guy that wrote the lick, for Down in Flames. So
well, you had mentioned this about being, was it the only person that produced the same bands that Ted Templeman produced, like the three major bands?
Tom Johnson from the Doobie Brothers and I were chatting, and somehow he was talking to Ted on the phone because they're still friendly. And I was producing the Doobies. We just finished a new one that's coming out. And he put me on the phone with Ted, and he said, we're in a very small club.
Right.
And I said, okay, what's the club? He said, I think maybe there's two of us, we both produced the Doobie Brothers and Van Halen. So, but you can hear, it's interesting having listened to obviously the Doobies material, and you listen to Van Halen, a lot of the harmonies and comes from just, you can see how Ted arranged maybe some of the harmonies or suggested to those guys. I don't want to step on anyone's, toes.
But they said that, they did exactly what you're talking about, rearranged, pulled licks from old songs, moved things around, shifted stuff, just exactly what you said with Ted. I
mean, I've heard, and Dave, I think it's Dave or Ed who told me this, where I know Rod Stewart did it with, I believe when he wrote Maggie May, and then it became a hit. Of course, the record company at first was like, oh, I don't know if it's a single, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, it became what it became. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they come back and they go, we need another one like that. So supposedly You Wear It Well is the same tempo as Maggie May with the chords reversed. You wear it well. It's like similar. It's got that same beat.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's very similar, and I'm sure Ed did this. He had talked to me about that at times, where they would find a song that they loved, the feel of it or the groove, and sometimes they would learn the chords, and they were just like, "Oh, let's do this and this," and and it became a new avenue for creativity, and everybody does it.
Right.
So, I mean, we're all looking to be inspired, and wherever that comes from is important, is vital. So
coming from that point, you ended up having these guys down to Henson, right?
Right. So I had met David Lee Roth at Henson. He was working on some stuff, and I just find him so charming, and brilliant and hysterical and kooky, and he's Diamond Dave.
Right.
And so there was talk that maybe we would go to 5150 and do it there.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, if I recall, Ed's studio was really just kind of set up for rehearsing. Even though he had an SSL there,
Mm-hmm.
I think they were using like 4 faders, or whatever. Like, here's the drum bus, here's Ed's guitar world and bass and some vocals, but it wasn't really set up with Pro Tools, and half the console needed some work, and I think also for Dave creatively, it's closer to where I think he lives in Pasadena, so I think and he had a rhythm at Henson.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that took a second to have the conversation, and they came down, Al and Wolf and Ed came down, and we went in Studio D at Henson and just camped out there and for 6 months, really. And which is interesting because I tend to work pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But these guys, I just took all expectations and just, I just knew it's going to take what it's going to take.
Okay.
And I was in for the ride, and because I wanted to learn and be around them, and I knew what I was doing. I was aware of the importance of this as a fan, and like any kid of my age, hearing Van Halen for the first time, was like a sonic boom. It was a life-changing event. I remember literally I lived in New York City, and I got the first Van Halen record, and I think you really got me was the single, or I'd heard that on the radio.
Right.
I was doing an internship at a radio station after school, and I'd heard the single, and I got the record, but I hadn't heard Eruption yet.
Right.
And I remember the moment like it was yesterday. I was probably doing my homework, and Eruption came on, and I just put my pencil down, and nothing was the same after that. And put my pencil down and picked up my guitar and like tried to see, oh, he's tuned down. Oh, he's in E flat. Oh, that's a phase shifter. Oh, is that an echo play? You're 12, 13 years old. You're like, what is this? And,
right. Yeah.
I obviously was a Zeppelin fan, and Floyd and Hendrix and Deep Purple and Jeff Beck. I'd actually asked Ed, if you listen to Wired, Lead Boots,
mm-hmm.
and the way the delay is on Lead Boots, the delay is here. So here's the direct, and there's like a little bit of reverb and delay on your right if you listen on headphones.
Right.
And I asked Ed, were you chasing that at all? Like when you were getting your sound in the studio, and because we've all heard the Kiss demos, the Gene Simmons demo.
Right. Quite different.
and can you imagine if that they would have been like any other? It's not really who they were.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
So somebody had, whether it was Don or Ted or Ed, to someone to put the plate, the EMT on the right with the Echoplex.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the amazing thing as a listener in stereo, it becomes like, here's the direct and here's the post.
Right.
Do you understand? So like, here's the post delay and here's the post reverb. That way, when we were all kids, we all went, moved the balance knob to the left or right to listen to Ed's sound. And you're like, wow, that's just all return. That's just all, but you don't know this as a kid.
Right.
It's kind of like all the stuff we did with Beatle records. It's like, oh, the drums are on the right and the bass, and all the backgrounds are on the left, and they had one more track to do so not a lot of people were doing that.
Right,
So,
right.
And
What do you think that, like today when we were talking about processing on the, on the bus or whatever, the widening and everything that we do today, this was like a widening before there was that to do in a digital format. This is a wide.
Yeah, I mean, they had, there were certain, oh my God, I'm spacing on the effect. Joe Walsh used it a lot. There was the Ursa Major, which I have one, which is just kind of, it's like fast, and it spreads vocals, or like a Rev 5, which is a Yamaha, early reflections, where you can take your vocal and spread it wider, so it kind of fills up the track, and obviously H3000s can do it, and AMSs or DMXs,
Well, that's sort of like when they first in '78. That was just around the time the harmonizers became a thing they could even use to do.
You could do you could do a little bit of that, but then obviously, when you get into Ed's sound later, it was more of like guitar rack,
sure,
with H3000s, and his delay time, by the way, was always 250 and 500, because we had two SDEs in the studio when we were tracking, and that was his delay times, 250 and 500.
So one on the left, one on the right, and half time.
Right. So no dotted anything, no edge like stuff, or no dotted or eighths or anything. It was always like probably eighths and quarters,
Right. When you, the process of getting these guys together, now, did Dave and them interface when they were doing the recording, or was it totally separate?
It was, I mean, now I think it's at the time, it was, they would respect each other's process. So, the guys would come in and track, and because they knew what the objective was, they knew we had to put down this track. And so we would probably, and Dave likes to work at night, and those guys get up really early.
Yeah, I'd heard that really early.
I'm telling, this is so from what I gathered, this is a lot of days. Al and Ed and Wolf would literally go up to 5150, practice before they came to the studio.
Wow.
So that means they're playing at 6 a.m.
Right.
Or 5:30.
Yeah. I'd heard he had done that as he got, kind of later in his life. He became very
morning.
Right. Yeah. Very morning.
And like they're done by 9, and then he would have breakfast, and, they would show up at the studio, the three of them together, most days in the same jacket. They had 3 puffy, little parkas, and it was so, it was adorable. So they were like day guys, so we were 10 a.m., sometimes 11, like downbeat, like boom, they would walk in like 2 minutes before 11, saddle up. Sometimes we would talk. We had a couch in the live room and table and chairs, and there was a Les Paul of mine sitting there, and a little Marshall 1x12, and Ed would just play. And yes, he sounded like Andy Van Halen playing through a 112 Marshall and a Les Paul. Right. There's actually some stuff on the record he's playing a Les Paul. And
you remember what? You remember what songs that was?
No, I don't. One song he might have. I know he used one of my Strats on, and then your blues,
probably so, because it's.
And then it's a very Hendrixy kind of solo, and then he might have retracted up at his place, but some of the and there was a couple songs at the end of the record where he replayed one or two of the solos, because all of a sudden at the end of the record there's a couple songs that are a lot of wah-wah, right? And I have versions of that where he wasn't using the wah, It's like everything, like when you put it up, it was like, okay, one wah wah, this, and at some point, I guess he just was in that mood and just redid one of the solos, I think, up at his place. Yeah. So, but anyway, so they would track during the day, and depending on where Dave was at lyrically, and felt like he had a handle on whatever the song of the day, or he'd come in and then those guys would kind of just give him his space, and the lights would come low. Like those guys, it was like a lunchroom cafeteria, super bright lights and drinking their, and had like Red Bulls and drinking Red Bulls. And then, once we got the take, they would play the same song. Sometimes we do 2 a day, maybe 1 a day.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes we'd go back and hit that song again. We'd listen to it. And, yeah. And then Dave would come in and he would, weave his magic, and we'd sit there and he'd show me the lyrics, and we'd kind of sometimes go through them. And,
let me ask you this, being such a great songwriter yourself, the way that he would drop these melodies into songs like Unchained, it was so unique. Can you kind of comment on how he worked in this particular?
Well, when people, I get really protective of Dave sometimes, because, when, the way, like any, people go, oh, Dave is this or Dave is that. And I'm like, no one in this world, as a singer or a writer, would have done what he did on Hot for Teacher.
Sure, right, exactly.
So, you think of Hot for Teacher, the big intro, and then it comes down to the blues lick, and any other singer in the world would have started singing right there. That's my experience. And I love Sammy, but I have a feeling Sammy would have started singing right there.
Right.
Dave does not. Dave sets up a movie. Dave sets up a visual. Oh man, I wonder what the teacher's going to look like this year, man. And I asked him at one point, I go, where does that come from? Like, because any other knucklehead would have started singing, because I'm the singer and I'm cool and I'm, yeah. And he didn't. And he goes, Guys and Dolls.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
West Side Story, man. I go, and that's why you're the man.
Right.
That's why. Because that's what made Van Halen interesting. Yes, you have this incredible lead guitar player. You have this incredible singers between Michael and Ed and Dave. And then you have Al, and to me, that's what, listening to the Audible version of Al's book, I mean, I was in my car and just the opening I had to pull over. It just made me cry, because it's to see those, we've all seen Ed on his own, like, whether it's David Letterman or Saturday Night Live.
Right.
It's not Van Halen.
Yeah, he didn't even like those performances,
and you know what? I got to be honest. I think the Beat It solo still, again, it's great solo. I get it, but it ain't Van Halen.
Right.
I always say this even with Bon Jovi, when I call it the Tico de Gallo. If the way Tico plays drums, there's there's Bon Jovi. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
it's his swing, it's his sauce. And Al is one of the greatest rock and roll drummers to ever walk the face of this earth. I mean, you can hear Hal Blaine, you can hear Billy Cobham, you can hear Bill Bruford, you can hear Bonham, you can hear these, or Blake, you can hear all these great drummers.
Right.
He's playing, but he's Al,
right.
And I've been really, really fortunate to work with some of the greatest drummers in the world and been able to record them. I have never, ever seen anything like the synchronicity between Eddie and Al, ever. Maybe Jimmy Page and Bonham, like that kind of, or Keith Moon and Townsend,
Right. Right.
or Keith and Charlie Watts.
Mm-hmm.
That thing, and it's so hard to describe, but you feel it. It's how it swings. Eddie is the funkiest fucking guitar player. People are like, no, he's a shredder. He says, no. His rhythm, because he was a drummer, his pocket, and Al's pocket, I get emotional now, because there were times when they were playing whatever song that's on this record. Pick any of them. I'm telling you, there were moments within the tracking, take 8, where Ed lifts his shoulder slightly to lean into something, and Al is right there. I felt, that's to me where I felt so blessed to be a witness to this. And Ed was standing right next to me, mm-hmm. and Al is through the glass, but they're looking at each other as they're playing. So I'm seeing the communication, the nonverbal communication.
Right.
And God bless Wolf, fucking hanging just in there with them, holding it down. Because Wolf is the historian,
Right.
Because sometimes we don't realize the work we have done. And here's Wolf says, no, on that song you did this. And in this song you did that. And in the history of this, that was recorded. I mean, he's an historian. And which makes him a great musician, I mean, the tutelage of his father. I remember when I first met Ed, he just talked about Wolf's drumming. He didn't even talk about his bass playing.
Yeah, I remember.
And Wolf has become, who he is still becoming, this writer, this musician and guitar player and singer and songwriter, and so proud of him. So, I mean, I'm just, we saw each other at Music Cares because he played Have a Nice Day, which is a song that John Ritchie and I wrote. And he came up to me, he was like, I'm doing your song, man. I'm like, I heard. And he goes, I hope we don't mess it up. And, he's like Ed. He's just has a big heart, and I love him, and I want nothing but joy and success for him, because he's the real deal, and carrying the flame, and is a deep well too. So now you take into consideration this relationship between obviously the three of those guys, and then the brilliance and the writing. Because if you really listen to this record, the lyrics on this record are so good.
They are. They're awesome. I love them.
They're it's like, get over yourself, people. Really go listen to what Dave wrote, because he put in the time. Right. He dotted the I's and he crossed the T's, and there's a lot of tongue in cheek. There's a lot of double entendres. There's a lot of metaphors. It's deep. So he had almost the toughest job. These guys, I mean, you know what I mean? It's easy, like as guitar players or musicians, we're like, oh yeah, we got the take. There it is. And then obviously the solo. Right. But Dave's the one who's like, yeah, but I'm the one who has to stand out there and sell it too and deliver it. And he did. He, there were a couple times it was like he had all these verses, and, occasionally I would be like, your fourth verse is so good. You're not even, I don't think you're even using that one. That maybe is better. So as a producer, you just go, you lob out suggestions. Right. Because I'm always coming as a fan too. It's like, wow, this verse is so well written. It'd be a shame for people not to hear that, because it really ties into the story right after verse 1, and sets up that pre-chorus, and so sometimes he'd get mad at me and go, and then maybe he'd try it, and
But a lot of the haters were out there going they didn't like Tattoo when it came out. But I personally loved it. I thought it was totally Dave. I thought it, had Dave's whole vibe.
I remember. So we had the track, and to watch Dave's creative process. Yeah, Tattoo, because it's kind of.
Mid tempo.
I remember where when he kind of found the melody, and because his influences are deep, there was vaudeville and it's just old black and white movies, and he's not just coming from like Guitar Center melodies,
Right.
and so his sense of reference and depth of his melodies at times. So he had this thing, this kind of, I don't want to say almost not Rudy Valley, but just bop, 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 and then he had this great lyric in this, and I was like, let's build it up, let's really stack it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was into it, and because Dave's, that's the thing. People don't think Dave's voice is high. He can go really high.
Well, yeah,
like much higher than people think.
Okay,
and not just the wow, all the falsetto-y stuff, right. But just as his range, he A's and B's, and he can go up there. So yeah, that's all stacked with him. Vocal. We stacked it all with him. And then I think later I added Ed just a little bit and Wolf in there, but it's mostly.
That's an awesome opening. I mean, the first thing you hear is that vocal.
Yeah, and I thought She's the Woman maybe should have been the single.
Yeah, a lot of people said that. Yeah, but
yeah, and I think I said that at one point instead of Tattoo, and. I'm playing keyboards on Tattoo.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
Which I was not the plan. There was.
What is that sound that you're playing there in that? Then it's like sort of a organ, or what is it? Sort of a.
It's a synth. It's like I think it's a Juno 60.
Okay, because I was with that samples. It's a unique sound.
And then I think I mixed it with something, maybe in the box a little bit, but it's a real keyboard because. Dave was working on the lyric, and then at one point he was like still writing something, and he's like, "Great, you play keyboards." I'm like, "I'm not playing keyboards on a Van Halen song. Not when the guy that's in the band is a great keyboard player. Why don't we just you're doing it? Do what I tell you." And I'm like, so that's me playing some of those pads, and
wow,
which is fun,
right? Cool.
So he played on a Van Halen song. But, listen, if Ed was there, he would obviously played it probably better with better voicings. And my job was to keep the train moving, and keep the party going. Right. And then it gave Dave a second to just finish what he was writing. And then we went back. But, he was kind of putting his hands on he was like, try this voicing, try this chord, try this, So he was definitely, in there too. It wasn't just like, I'm just like, oh yeah, let me just, paint on your, song. It was,
right.
There was definite quality control over my shoulder. We were doing. Right. I was like, no, turn the filter down. Add another note to the voicing. No.
Well, that's funny, because you never hear, this kind of thing about Dave, being. Because I think we think of him just as the front man. We don't think that he played acoustic guitar back in the days. He plays acoustic guitar on stage. He's
a good guitar player.
Right. He's a musician, right? You don't think of that.
I'm telling you, he's a good player. He picks up an acoustic guitar. He's a good player.
Right.
When he was Ice Cream Man and all that kind of stuff, and his feel is good. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So.
Let me ask you about Chinatown. This is a really cool thing for Ed and his son. This intro and the whole, these synced lines they're playing together on the bass and guitar. What tell me about that song and about how that all came together.
That song, In a sense, it was. It. I can't. It was a really hard song. So when it came time to mix that song, it's tough because it's not traditional in the sense. Everybody's taking up a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
Not like where Ed's here and the bass is below, and then the drums are, kind of wrapped around the guitar, and it was everybody is look at me, I want to say look at me, but it's more like this interplay and counterpoint going on between Ed and Wolf, and so it was even at the end of the song, all the way through the song. But that's why those guys it was so helpful. They were so well rehearsed, So they came in. They did not. That was worked out before they came in. I think we would go over little bits of it, but the essence of all that. This is what we want to try and start with. This is. So it's just getting the sound right, getting the where Wolf was sitting at a certain place to stand on his own and complement Ed's tone, and so it was more of that. If I recall, in regards to that song,
I was just say how you get those two. I know that Ed and Wolf had a new dynamic with the sound that Wolf had, so you had to kind of balance those two tones against each other.
Right. I mean, if I recall, we had a 5150 that for Wolf too.
Right.
And I think he had another Fender kind of amp there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the setup was interesting. The reason we worked in Studio D was that we could have 3 different guitar stations all going at the same time. Okay. So Ed's amps on the record were his original Marshall.
The original Plexi.
Original Plexi, mm-hmm. with the original cabinet. Okay. That was one.
The one without the covering?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay. So the strip cabinet.
Strip cabinet, mm-hmm. with a 57 right on the cone, mm-hmm. and a 421 on an angle.
Okay.
Then he had this PV 5152.
Oh, weird. Okay.
A $500 amp on eBay, kids. He liked that amp.
Okay.
So that was amp 2. With and then amp 3 was a 5150, a new version.
Right.
And he had this little mod in the back that he could play with it, so it kind of got a little gushier or a little, he and I took an X-Acto blade and cut the grill cloth out of those cabinets.
Oh wow!
Same thing.
He didn't like that. Yeah, he didn't like that. I know that
he liked getting the mic as close to the speaker as possible. I mean, it was probably an inch, maybe a couple inches off the cone.
Right.
But definitely within the box.
So
past the grill.
The other mic was at an angle, though. You said
the 421 was on an angle.
Okay, because early on when Don mic'd him, that was sort of what they were doing back then. I think sort of a.
Yeah, so he obviously liked that sound. You're getting the brightness from the cone, all the clarity in the chime, and you're getting the meat and the woodiness and the not the outer part of the speaker. And his cabinets had greenback 20s.
Right. Super
like
low
greenback 20, which is, I'll tell you, his cabinet sounds awesome. Those 5150 cabinets, those Celestians are basically try to get as close as possible to a greenback 20 mm-hmm. watt speaker, right. Which are kind of more papery. They just have more of it's kind of hard to describe, but they're really musical. Like I love greenback 25s, but 20s, I have one cabinet. I own a 68 50 watt Plexi and with greenback 20s in it. And Phil X and I, we love that. We use that amp all over Bon Jovi's records. You know, it's like, I lucked out. I have this, it's like the most magical 50-watt head and cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing, you know, 57 on the cone and a 421 on an angle. Sometimes we don't even use the 421, you know, depending on the part.
Right.
So
Let me ask you this question though, since you had this kind of surgical speaker thing with Ed back in the early days, there's a rumor, at least there's a theory that he used a JBL D120
yeah,
and a regular Celestion. What do you think?
I think well, you can hear it. There's that clip on YouTube. You can hear it where there's the JBL. See, and I think that picture, that famous picture from Sunset Sound, you can see the cones, the silver cones on the top.
Right.
And so I think we didn't do that this time, but I'll tell you this, he likes APIs. He likes AMS delays and reverb. He likes 20, you know, the Roland delays, and all his effects on the floor were, you know, store bought Guitar Center, you know, the Eddie Van Halen phaser, the Eddie Van Halen flanger. That, you know, there wasn't like some vintage, you know, MXR flanger. It wasn't some old Phase 90. Right. It was the stock wah-wah flanger phaser, all hooked up right into the amp. You know, obviously his original plexi isn't as hot or as gainy,
right, as
the 5150 and the 5152. I loved the plexi. I was always pushing it up, and he was always pulling it down. He goes, "I have to work too hard," you know.
Right.
You know, and then, ironically enough, I went to Guitar Center, I think on a break or something, and I found a 100-watt plexi that was 40 serial numbers away from Ed's.
Oh wow! Okay, there you go.
And they didn't realize what they had. God bless them. And it was like it was inexpensive. It was literally like, you know, $2,000 or something.
Wow. Okay.
The head, you know, an old plexi.
Yep.
So there were deals still to be had back then. And and I brought it in, and he played it because there was a day his amp went down.
Okay.
And he used my Marshall. And he said, "Yeah, the thing about these, you know, my recollection is that they were, when I was younger, they were gainier. You know, they've lose some life over the years."
Yeah.
But, you know, there's also a lot of other theories, which he and I didn't really get into, which is, if you look at a lot of this new footage, you know, there's the talk that Ed slaved some of his amps. So it's like he had his main Marshall, and then, because the Echoplex doesn't always sound like it's before the Marshall. It almost sounds like it's in a loop, but obviously there's no loop. So what he would do is he would slave another Marshall, and the Echoplex was in the middle.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sort of like a wet, dry, wet before it was there.
Right. Or just, like a dry, wet.
Right. Dry in front.
You know, I don't think it was stereo then. It was, you know,
right. Just driving a wet.
Because I was talking to Dave Friedman about this, and there's a picture. I guess the rumor is, or the talk is, when they went to Japan, which is in this new footage,
right,
you can see all his Marshalls.
Yep.
When they came back from Japan, some of the gear went missing.
Right.
And there's a picture where they think they played in San Diego, where he's playing. He maybe got his main Marshall back, but they're Music Man amps below.
Right. Yep.
So that's the theory, where maybe that's when he was doing wet, dry, or maybe there was a short delay and a long delay, and because I think he was using the Music Man's as slave amps,
right,
power amps.
And then there was the fact when he would switch over from Eruption to You Really Got Me, he would switch amps with a foot switch. That's how he would go right into it. He had another amp connected, do a foot switch for that.
I mean, the delay would carry on, and then
I don't
he'd
know.
go.
I don't know how he would have gotten it connected. What chain that would have been, but it was. We got to figure that out with Rudy, his tech.
I said something to him once where I think I had some book and I brought it in, and showed up, those pictures of, it's a Japanese Van Halen book.
Yeah, with the yellow bumblebee on the front, right? Lots of black and white photos of the gear.
Yes.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And you can obviously see the G10 or the GE10, the EQ.
Right in front, yeah.
And I'm like trying to look, I looked at him, I go, kind of pushed pretty hard, huh? And he was like, no, he always kind of downplayed, that he was influenced by Cream or that he was listening to Zeppelin. And then obviously over the years, we've heard him, backstage play like, a solo from something, or, there's always the rumor that he knew Crossroads perfectly. And
there's that clip of him playing a Whole Lot of Love in his studio, that when he's playing the whole solo.
And the Who too, they're playing the Who with Sammy and, so I don't know. I think it was that period where at the Starwood and all those clubs where, people would say, oh, he would turn his back to the audience because he didn't want people to see what he was doing as far as tapping. And, there was one day in the studio, because when I went to music school, my main teacher was a gentleman named Steve Lynch, who was in a band called Autograph.
Yeah, of course.
So Steve was my guy. He was my mentor for years.
And he was on the '84 tour, and he was tapping, multi-finger tapping back then.
And Steve's a great player, and so he. But I tap like this down.
Okay.
Ed taps up.
Yeah, he pulls on the string.
He pushes up on the string, and I was sitting with him, and I'm tapping, and I'm going down, and he's like, no, John, it's up, and I'm like, no, it's so much better down, and he goes, really? So I knew what I was doing. I was just fucking with him, and I was like, yeah, but think how far you would have gone if you had gone down instead of up.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's another whole story about his picking hand.
So he picks. So sometimes he's picking with his thumb and his index finger.
Yeah, sometimes.
And a lot of times he's picking with his second finger and his thumb.
Right.
So because it was like the angle. So it was literally, we're filming this too, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So he would hold his pick like this, and so he could tap up. And he's holding his pick. I actually have a bunch of his picks.
Oh yeah. I was going to say, one of the.
So here. So this is a gold Herco.
Right. Herco. Uh-huh.
He at the end, we would go in the hallway because he liked these gold Hercos.
Yeah. I
but he liked the silver ones. So we had Dunlop try and make one in between. So these are the 50s. The silver ones are the 75s. I know what's going to happen here. People are going to be. And so we had them make kind of one in between. So those, you see some of those Van Halen ones that are out there.
Yeah, I've got one right here.
Yeah, the silver one, right? So check this out.
Yeah.
So they sent us, I think I have it at the studio. I have like bags, and they say A, B, C, and D on them.
Okay.
And they're different thickness of pick.
Right.
And we would kind of sit there and, play and try and listen on, record it. This is a little thicker, so it's just the tone is slightly different, but this feels better. And then there were some that didn't have the, obviously this on there, the rough part, which because when I play, so I do this. I don't play like this. I play like that. Oh, and so I want the rough side. So if you listen to, and I've had this conversation with Jimmy Page, So Jimmy Page holds his pick like uses the rough side.
Okay.
They've reissued his pick. It's called oh my god, the Holy Grail or something. It's kind of almost grayish. It's kind of like the silver one, but slightly different. Those are cool. You should try those.
Okay.
But but if you listen to Zeppelin, you can hear it. Once you start playing with these picks and you play like this, instead of that, and every Bon Jovi song, like since I've been around, even Richie really kind of got into this. It's kind of this little scrape on the strings. And if you listen to Zeppelin and you start to know the tone and the sound, you can't unhear it.
Okay.
It's crazy. It's like, since I've been loving.
What did Jimmy say why he liked it?
It's interesting. It was that period because Tom Johnson from the Doobies uses these. Neil Young, Stephen Stills. This was the pick that these guys all, because one day I dropped mine and I picked it up and Tom goes, "Oh, that's mine." I go, "No, man, that's mine." And he goes, "Kid, I've been playing this since '72." So I was like, "I'm kidding, of course, but I have one of Neil's, but those guys use the gold ones. I mostly use the golds. Silvers are a little like Keith Urban likes. I remember he liked the silver ones, but he's gone on to kind of tweak his even more.
Right. So for Ed's sound, what do
but he would do this. Sorry, he would. So there were some that would be sent from Dunlop, and they didn't have a lot of the grip or the way he wanted it. So we would go in the hallway and take a soldering iron, and Ed would burn lines into the pick.
Right.
So he could, the way he would come up, it would kind of, it was more.
It would actually flick like that.
It would grab the string, and he liked that. So it's interesting that all these guitar players, I was found it on my own, late to the party, but it's, you listen to The Edge, obviously, and he's using a blue German pick, and I can't really use his because they're it's too sandpapery. These are softer and easier to use than the silver ones.
So then you got on the other side of the fence of this kind of flexible pick thing. You got Yngwie uses a super hard Delrin, 1.15, or even something like this, which is a metal pick. This was one of Carlos Cavazzo's metal picks.
Yeah, and I remember Ed had some of those metal picks too.
Did he use them in the studio or not?
No, he didn't. But when I first met him, he had metal picks.
Right.
And then, listen, I went through that period when, I was 17, 18, where I was using a Jazz 3 like everybody else.
Right. So did you feel like for the same thing as I thought? It just felt like you were more in touch with the string, tight, really no give.
I think what happens is, for me, I do this a lot. So I'm playing, and then I do this with my hands. So I'm going from here to this.
Right.
So the Jazz 3 always, I think, would fall out, and it's a little thicker. And like Eric Johnson uses the Jazz 3. Joe Bonamassa has his version of that, and I think they're slightly different. Sometimes people think you're just changing the color of the pick just to change the color, but there's not. There's actually a difference. The color changes the density of the pick. Really?
I didn't know that.
It gets very deep.
That's wild.
But here's my point. I was just listening to Al's book, and Al's talking about his father, Ed and Al's father.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
About the reed.
Yes.
And those guys are like that with their playing, their instruments. Al's drumsticks are so thin. They're almost like timbali drumsticks.
Really?
People, you think, he's probably got, big drumsticks. They're thin and light.
How hard does he hit, though? I mean, really?
His drums, the shells are completely stripped, no lacquer. He when he sits behind the kit and he starts playing, it sounds massive, but he's not playing that hard at all.
Okay.
He's not choking the sound.
Right.
He's almost playing like a jazz drummer. It's
Right.
so crazy.
Yeah.
And Ginger Baker, Bonham, Bill Bruford, and Alex Van Halen, to me, have very identifiable snare sound. We all have
Right.
Bonhams, but Al, was always searching and always, the way he does a rim shot, there was always a mic over his snare drum, like some kind of Neumann we would put over him,
Mhm.
67 or 47, something like a high end mic, just enough where we could take the punch from it, but
Mhm.
still get. And his snare sound is. I mean, like Ed plays one note, Al hits one drum, and it's Alex Van Halen.
Right. Right.
So
That's really interesting about how hard he hit because you're more people. People think I think somebody even said this about Bonham that he didn't hit as hard as people thought he did.
no, it's um, yeah, Al is one of the greats for me. I mean, the way he plays, his attention to detail on his drums and the tuning and the sound, and uh, JD, who is Al's drum tech and friend, works with Tico Torres.
Right. Right. Yep.
So I get to spend a lot of time with JD. He also was Joey Kramer's drum
Yeah.
tech.
I've seen him do that jam with Phil X where they did the Van Halen thing. There was a little Van Halen thing.
That's where we're eating chicken soup and Gatoring. I mean, it's. Listen, I'm weird, because I'm not. I'm. This is not a slag on anybody or anything. It's just like,
Right.
listen, I got to stand next to Eddie and work with him for a while, and you know, and Phil does it great. He's really, Phil gets the swagger.
Right.
Because Phil's, I always kid Phil about this because he's Greek,
Right. I know.
and he played bouzouki.
Right.
So when most guys shred, I just like head to the bathroom.
Right.
I find it really, give me Mike Campbell. You know what I mean? Any day of the week.
Right.
I'm not, and so it's, there's a couple guys that I just don't, I find it very gratuitous.
Uh-huh.
And, if you're not going to be Ed or you're not, but when Phil does it, because of his background, he has, even when he plays fast, there's still his right hand, there's still his heritage, his
Oh
Greek
yeah.
heritage in there. And I
Yeah.
hear it. You can hear it.
Yeah.
And so there's a swing to it that I find, guys get really, I'm friends with Dweezil and Pete Thorne, and people get into like, oh, they're not scraping the string correctly. You go up and you scrape down, and I'll tell you the thing when you're around when watching Ed is he makes it look easy. He makes it look effortless, and when you're really watching him, it's very cowboy chordy. It's not, do you know what I mean? It's bar this, and his shapes are very first position shapes, and it's triads, very triad. And I asked him once, I said, okay, let's play this game. He's like, okay. A minor, go. What are you thinking? Are you thinking the 5 positions of the pentatonic scale? Are you weaving in between major and minor consciously? And he's like, no. He goes, sometimes I'm thinking a minor triad here in the A minor pentatonic, and then I think, okay, there's a minor, and then this gets me here, and then that gets me there, and which is kind of connecting the 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, and of course here's what some people refer to as the equator.
Mhm.
If you're in A minor, and here's A major, here's A minor, and the Luke thing where you're playing in this position of the pentatonic scale before just the traditional one, like right here,
Mhm.
which is I guess the third position, and so that's Frampton, and then you get up into here, which is the major seventh, and then major, and then back into minor, and then the octave, and then obviously the other position of those five positions.
Right.
But he's playing sometimes. I noticed he would play these pseudo whole tony,
Right.
so where he's connecting major and minor. I've seen Michael Landau do it. He kind of does it at times.
Like when he's doing like 5/7/9 or whatever, and he's doing that in a pattern, but you're talking
Right.
about, right? He does that a lot.
And Phil's great at that. He's really put in the time to understand it. I have this weird thing. I always feel like it's sacrilegious. I don't know what it is. Because when I played with Rod, I had to learn all of Jeff Beck's stuff,
Right.
note for note,
Right.
Rod would be like, come on, mate, and so it's like the bends, and when you're playing, people get ready, or infatuation, or passion, or some of those, or even truth, or and certainly the Ronnie Wood stuff, I would try to learn as close to note for note, and I loved it because it's our heroes,
Mm-hmm.
But there's, and Jimmy Page, obviously, the slinkiness, and trying to learn some of that stuff. But I think for me personally, as a songwriter, I let that stuff go,
Right.
Because I'm trying to write my own licks. I'm trying to come up with my own stuff. And I can be want to be influenced, but I don't want to be derivative.
Right. Like, so if you probably heard, like, if you heard all those tapes, right? When you heard the demos going way back, he kind of changed from this guy who was a pentatonic cream guy, to this new guy that had the whole tone thing that you're talking about, the Holdsworthy and
Holdsworth. I'm sure a lot of that's Holdsworth.
Right. So when do you think he probably heard Holdsworth? What was the first time that Holdsworth was kind of popular in America or in England even?
Well, for
late
me,
70s?
Yeah, because you heard there was that Tony Williams record he played on. Was it Believe It or Lifetime?
Mm-hmm.
One of those two records. There was Tony Williams, then there was the Bill Bruford record, and then there was UK.
Right.
In the Dead of Night.
Right.
And that to me was one of those, which brought me back to, try to find out earlier Holdsworth.
What was the year that UK album came out?
God, it must have been 82 or 3.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to tie in the Ice Cream Man lick. Where did that come from?
You're probably deeper than I am.
Like, where did that lick come from? Could it couldn't have been Holdsworth, could it? Or could have it? I guess it could.
I don't know, but I think these guys, was he listening to guys even like Pat Metheny?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
was he listening?
He was listening to Steve Howe. We know that for sure.
Steve Howe, come on. Steve Howe was the man.
Right.
Steve Howe was doing crazy stuff. Lee John Roth was doing some crazy, some of those licks are very, Phil showed me a couple things like, oh, look, here's Lee John Roth, here's Eddie Van Halen.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the whole tone, what's really interesting, I don't know if you've ever seen this video, but I'll tell you about it. It's on YouTube. It's called, and you may have seen it, EVH, Another Day at the Office. It's a guy in the audience filming every song on his hands, the whole show, HD. And for the first time, for me, I've been listening and watching him since I was 12, For the first time, I'm getting to really see every lick, even if it's kind of a reincarnated version of Out of Love Again, the solo or whatever. I'm getting to see that whole tone, how he's doing that. And this is the weirdest thing. If you've ever watched anybody play the Running with the Devil last 3 notes on the solo, right? Da, 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 right?
Yeah.
Watch Ed do it and then watch everybody else do it. It's like his hand never moves, but it's double stops.
Yeah.
And like everybody else kind of does this 3-note combination with the, with that. And when you
No,
watch,
he's barring it, right?
I think so. And
Which is could be Steve Howe. Yeah.
yeah, but the last 3 notes of that sequence, it's double stops.
Oh, right.
Ah, da, da.
Oh, those the octaves
The
or the.
last, well, that's what, yeah, watch his hand when he plays it. It stays in one position and it never moves. He bends it up. But it's weird to watch everybody else play that and watch him do it. Because I saw him do it on Kimmel real close on his hand. And I was like, why has none of us figured that 1-3 lick, that 3 notes out?
There was something I heard recently, and it was very similar to that lick,
Yeah.
and it was like a '70s. Oh my god, I can't believe I can't remember. It's like a '70s like R&B song,
Right.
or
Sounds like a horn part.
it was like not Summer Breeze, or it was like something from America, or like it was or it's very Yes, you know. I mean, that was what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you go, oh, I'm just gonna take I don't
Right.
know, maybe.
Well, yeah, he had his dad there too, with
Right.
his thing,
So
and
I'm
hearing
sure that stuff seeped in subliminally all the time.
right into this piano background and the whole, that whole period that he went through in his life where he picked up all the classical.
I sat in the room and watched him play piano for a little while. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. What was that? I mean, what was he
Just
doing?
sitting at just like these cool, beautiful arpeggio, very kind of very right now, kind of all these kind of piano-y arpeggios and
Just improvising more or less.
improvising, just messing around. And never heard Al play.
Yeah. He plays piano too. Yeah. Yeah.
I would have loved to see that.
So the early days out in Van Halen with Michael Anthony, we got to get Michael Anthony in here. The vocals, everybody, I don't think everybody talks about it, but it was such an important blend in those voices, and that was a signature sound, and Ed's voice in particular as well. I mean, I think Wolfgang recently said this. You forget about my dad's voice in the mix.
I tell you, I saw them rehearse at the Forum. They were doing a show. It was right in the middle of the record or near the, and Ed was like, "Come down," and Patrick Leonard and I went down, producer, and we were. It was like we were. That was it. It was us standing in the middle of the Forum, watching these guys rehearse a show. It was incredible.
Just the two of you, just both of you,
the two of us and the crew. And then we went back and talked to Ed for a while. Maybe this is before the record. I don't know. They could play the whole show without Dave.
right?
It was crazy.
Yeah, I saw sound check right when Wolfgang came in.
I'm sorry, you're right. So this is this was Wolf. And Wolf singing Mike's part.
Right. I saw him sing lead on. They did Al Wait and sound check, and Wolf sang the lead. This is when he was 16.
Yeah.
I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah. No, he's yeah. I mean, listen, Michael Anthony's. That's the thing when you watch. This is okay. Here's the takeaway: when you watch the stuff that just came out.
Yep.
Wasn't it great to see how they were just they were a band?
Oh yeah.
They were really a band. Like
right.
No one was treated any different than anybody else. They were, there was a lot of love.
Right.
A lot of love from Mike, and Dave and Mike were cool, and Ed and Mike were cool, and Al, everybody was cool, and they were all messing around with each other. And then you cut to the footage of, that those 2 minutes where they're playing and Ed's playing the white Strat, and you're just like, he's 22 or something, or 23, and he's just on fire. and they're awesome. And Dave is awesome, and Michael Anthony is incredible. His bass playing is great,
Right,
and
right,
his singing is ridiculous.
right.
And they're like one of the great rock. I mean, I'd feel sorry for anyone having to go. Can you? And they were opening what for Black? Who are they opening for? Ozzy or Black Sabbath or something? Or
Journey on the first leg with Montrose on that leg, and then they
what
had
about the Garden when they first time they played the Garden?
probably Black Sabbath, probably, right?
Or maybe it was Ozzy. I don't know. I just felt sorry for whoever came.
Right. Oh well, yeah.
I tell you, when I was 14, I saw AC/DC open up for Rainbow at the Palladium in New York City. And to this day, still the loudest band I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then I saw them again at the Forum. Richie Sambora and I went, and we were standing at the soundboard, and somebody walked over and handed us ear plugs. And they were like, you guys are going to need this." And we were like, "Oh no, we're rock and roll. We don't." And he said, "Trust me." I was so loud. And I like loud. Everyone
I
knows.
know, right?
Like in the studio, we had Ocean Way monitors that we brought in. So like when those guys were tracking, it sounded like a PA.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've always heard that at 5150 you're gonna get your ears taken off.
Oh, you should have seen us in Studio D. It was literally like Alan Sides brought these giant, like full on. It was like a PA in the studio, like over 6 feet high, and you could turn it up, and it was not for the faint of heart. We would just crank them.
So
And
how are the guys' ears? I mean, everybody's kind of it's kind of thinking because Ed went to in-ears for the first time on the last tour. Yeah, I started thinking, man, he must be getting to the point where he really needs to do that in-ear thing.
I mean, Ed's hearing was pretty good. Al's was a little. I mean, this is probably why Al's hearing is a little troubled. Is they would cut to a cowbell.
Mm-hmm.
So we're cutting some song, and then after one of the takes, we were like, okay, that's a good one, but the cowbell was still going, and I went into the live room to go to the bathroom. It was so loud.
Wow. Yeah.
It was
yeah.
like, gang, gang, gang.
So they were cutting to a click with a cowbell as the sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a cowbell.
Right. Yeah, brutal. Yeah,
Clang, clang. So if you're listening to a cowbell from 11 to 6.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah, you know how that is. You have a click in your ear and it's cowbell. It's like the worst possible sound ever.
So he would come in at the end of the day. He would be like, "I'm sorry, what are you saying?"
Right.
But nothing. I'm certainly not a guy that's going to sit here. I'm super protective. I'm not like I hope I'm not saying anything that's out of school or.
No. I think every musician, including myself, has had issues with your. I mean, it's an occupational hazard. I mean, if you like it loud,
I listen loud, and
do you listen loud in your ears?
Pretty loud,
like you'd be on stage almost, but not quite, maybe as much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably at in my pack at 1:00.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a hefty volume.
And I like to feel it almost like to feel like I'm next to the amp with ears.
Well, Phil X and I wish we were allowed to keep a cabinet behind us. Just give us one cabinet, because our cabinets are underneath the stage. And
right.
So I'm always trying to get the biggest amount of headroom because my tone has to be different from Phil's. So Phil's is a little slightly more preamp distortion.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm, if it's my plexi, it's biased really cool, so it's really open, and so I'm like Malcolm, Malcolm to Angus, or my just more. I try to use more tellies, single coil, like stuff that's going to cut, and that gives it a little bit of also the petty Jersey, but even the more of the modern Killer Z, U2 side of tone.
Mm-hmm.
So that way I can balance out and support Phil rhythmically. And because if our tones were, if it's too, you know, JCM 800, it's not going to work.
Right. Doesn't have the, yeah, it's more grindy and
No, it's just, they're just filling up the same
right
space,
space.
you know,
Right. And
and
Bon Jovi's a pretty, I mean, you got the keyboards, you got all that thickness in there. You got to find space
so
for it.
I have to be pretty kind of chimey and almost, you know, if you think of Springsteen's guitar tone, it's just like really like cutting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I have to kind of go down that road. So, you know, I'm using like a TS1 two rock, you know, which is like a Dumble, but really like master all the way up, gain barely on, just pushing the amp. And then I use pedals to push the front end.
Yeah. 412 cabinet underneath or what
Yeah. With Redbacks, 150 watt speakers in them.
Oh, wow. You are going for clean.
So it's like, bam.
So what's your current projects you're working on? What are you doing?
Well, we have the Doobie Brothers coming out called Walk
Ooh.
This Road. That comes out in a month or so. And then we took, and so I'm excited about that. Working with Sheryl Crow on a record.
You want to know an interesting fact about Sheryl Crow? The Van Halen packed? Here you go. You ready? The Shark guitar that he played on the first tour, that guitar. Did you know that that first set of hits that she had were recorded, at least a couple of them were recorded in Pasadena, in the room where that guitar was when he bought it.
So say it again. So the guitar was where he bought the guitar.
Right. That space was turned to
one behind you, right? The one on your left.
Yeah. The one. Yeah. And so that room was turned into a studio by was it Bottrell?
Yeah, Bill Bottrell.
So it's his studio. I think the Tuesday Night Club where they would track, and that room is the actual room where that guitar came from.
Meaning the guy that had it before.
The music store that was there before.
Oh, it was a music store.
Yes, in Pasadena. Yeah. It's crazy.
Thinking about those videos that just came out.
Mm-hmm.
That he played it without a Floyd Rose.
Oh yeah.
That there was a brass nut.
Yep.
And a pickup from a 335.
Yep. PAF. Yeah.
And just like his tone is like, I mean,
it's kind of glassy, like had a lot of top end, glassy.
Some people, I think he had a treble bleed cap in his volume pot.
Okay.
So when he would roll down, it would get super clean.
Right.
Not like, most guitars don't have them. When you roll down, it gets dark.
Right.
His, you'd roll down and it would keep the clarity.
Right.
I think if, like the guitar that he used on Different Kind of Truth was the Stealth.
The black one, yeah.
The black one with ebony fingerboard and the kill switch on it.
That's kind of a departure from the maple. Do you think that maple and ebony have a different tone?
I think ebony, I love ebony because I have a black custom, a 68 custom that I use a lot.
Yeah.
And a 69 custom too. And I like ES 355s.
Right.
Those have ebony. And there's a snappiness to ebony that I like.
Mm-hmm.
What was funny though, he's so busy thinking about his playing and the tone, the sound. I picked up his guitar when we first started, and like maple or the ebony had shrunk a little bit, and the frets were kind of hanging off.
Yeah, they had a little bit of sprout. Sharp? Were they sharp?
Sprout is a really nice way of saying that. So when you run your hand up the neck, it was like little speed bumps, like
Right.
And I was like, Ed, man, Mark can roll those off a little bit. That's fine.
Really? I've heard his guitars were set up pretty, pretty high a lot of times back especially in the early days. But
In the action.
yeah.
Yeah, I like the action high too.
Yeah.
I'm weird. I'm like a lot of guys like it low. I like it's I was in London once and working at SARM Studios.
Hmm.
I was in Studio One and Jeff Beck was in the back and he was doing his motions and commotions the one with Somewhere Over the Rainbow on it.
Hmm.
And Steve Lipson, who produced that record, invited me in, and Jeff's guitar was sitting right there. So I was like, Steve, sorry, I just had to. And I just picked up his Strat, and the bar on his Strat was like, let's see, like that.
Okay.
So so you could really bend it, and the action was kind of where I thought it would be, kind of high, so he could really get under each string and control it, and
Right.
I thought that was really kind of cool.
Well, I was gonna say there's a video.
Little amps too.
Oh, there's a video of Rick Beato with Yngwie, and Yngwie's talking about high action and how
Yeah.
he likes it high too because he feels like because the strings trying to resonate, and if you're too tight to the bass, you're losing some tone. I feel that way once the action's up.
I like it honestly when the lower strings are lower than the higher strings. I like, the higher strings, I like the action a little higher than the lower strings.
Right.
Because you got to find that balance, because when you push down to play a chord, you don't want it to pull it out of tune. You don't want to. So, what I learned playing sessions is, and getting to work with, these famous LA session guitar players, Dean Parks or Tim Pierce or Landau and a lot of those guys, and watching them play, is their touch is really light. The biggest mistake I see from guys who come off the road and that are touring is they come back in the studio and they play too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And all their shit's not in tune because they're pushing down too hard. And think about this. This is what I always use as an example. So here comes your chorus, and you're double tracking your power chords at the top of the chorus, and it's whatever, a big E, not an E with a third in it. You're just like a stacked E chord. But if you come in and you go bam, like hit it hard, you have to think the tuning goes boom.
Right.
So if you then double that, you go boom, and then you quadruple them with the diesel underneath the Marshalls. And then an AC30. So the chorus goes instead of bam.
Right.
So the lighter you play, the more impactful it is when you hit it. And Ed wasn't playing super hard. That's why his picks weren't really heavy, super heavy picks.
Yeah, I was gonna say me and Phil talked about his touch, and
Yeah.
it's weird because there's some videos where it looks like, and there's one video where he's just playing the electric acoustically for somebody's giving the guitar away, and he's just kind of playing it. And you hear the attack, but then there's other times when he's playing super light, like in those those new videos, you see that.
Yeah. Well, he digs in at times. He digs in sometimes.
Right, for respect, yeah.
But I think when you're in a studio and you come off, like you've been on tour, and I'm guilty of it. You come back, your hands are just like
right,
because you're playing live, and also where you're holding your guitar and you're running around the stage and being a knucklehead and performing, and that's a style of playing too. I have to always make the adjustment because when I'm writing and recording, I sit, and then all of a sudden I walk into rehearsals. And it takes me an hour or so to adjust my playing to standing, because you're also standing and you're looking down,
right.
But I have to be observant of the singer and the drummer and feed off the band, and so you can't get stuck into this.
Right.
I mean, I remember Bukovac, my friend was working with Joe Walsh. and he was playing with Joe live, I guess, and he's playing live with Joe, and he's being very intricate and playing light, and Joe walks over and he goes, "What are you doing, man?" He goes, "I'm playing the." He goes, "No, rock and roll, man. Just fucking play. Don't, we're not in a studio,
Right.
So
Right.
there's definitely the two different sides to what we all do. You have to, it's about tuning and touch and feel and tone and taste and all these things. And then live, it's almost like it's called off book. You have to let that go and perform and play. And yes, I'm always conscious of, like, the delay trails and how gainy it is and where my volume is. And so you have to be aware of that. But I can look at videos of us with Bon Jovi, and I can see a video of us from, like, Rock in Rio, and I can look at my, as an observer, I look at my eyes, I go, oh, I'm listening.
Right.
I'm listening to myself.
Right. Right.
It's like, don't try not to do that.
Right. Right. You get caught in your own head. Did Did you ever feel like Ed ever got caught in his own process?
There was, I'll tell you what was great about Ed is there was one song where he would come, when we do the solos, there was one song he was playing, and and it's just like, play it again, play it again, play it again. And he's developing this theme, and it's interesting to see his process, and he was kind of getting, and you're like, oh, that, and then and it was nice that we're both guitar players. I would say, oh yeah, that's cool. When you go there and you're moving into this, that you should check this out. What, really? Was that cool? Play, at 226, just go back. And we go back, and right there, he goes, oh yeah, that's cool. That's a good. But there was one night, and this shows you how confident he is in a good way, and humble, was that he got to a place one night and he said, you know what? Can you just burn a copy of the solo? I'm going to go home tonight, and I'll work it up, and I'll come in tomorrow, and I'll have it. And he came in, we were talking, and I was kind of waiting for him to bring it up, and he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Not because he was trying to avoid it, but I just said, any luck? How did it go last night? Did you get anything? Or he's like, oh yeah, oh yeah. Let's go do it. And it's great. I wish I could remember the song. It's one of his solos where he plays this motif. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an arpeggiated motif within the solo, and it's worked out, And so be going back to preparation and being prepared, and so he's not afraid to be in the moment and trust his instincts, but he also knows that it's time to let me go elaborate on this and work on this and develop this, and give me a.
I was gonna say there was a time a few years back when I went and met Ross Hogarth, and he was at Vintage King in Nashville doing a clinic, right? And he pulled up Chinatown, and he played the solo section. And I looked at Ross and I said, "That was one take. That wasn't a comp." He goes, "No, that was live." I was like, "Wow!" So that whole, I don't know how prepared he was, but
very, because he'd been playing that solo for 8 months.
So he probably just went through one whole pass. And
yeah, there was one where he probably, when I think what happened when Ross started mixing, it was like, let me see if I can beat that. Let me see if I can. I know it now. Let me see if I can do that. So, but some of those things. That's what I was saying. He redid maybe that one, and there was a couple with like a wah-wah one, and but the drums and the vocals and none of that was touched.
How long did it take the whole thing from top to bottom, from cutting to
We
mix?
started cutting in January. By June, we were kind of done with all the tracking and overdubs. And I will say this: that before I broke down that room, I said to each of them, each get as much time as you need individually before we break down this room. So Ed had a day or so or two to sit there and listen to everything, every solo, every guitar part. We soloed everything, and he was like, I sign off on it. Then Al came, every drum fill, every song, soloing the drums and the bass. I sign off. David Lee Roth, every vocal, everything. He signed off. So I was like, because once we tear this room down, we can't just go, hey, let me, because now we're gonna, maybe go into mix mode, and and then Ed wanted to, mix at his place, and his room wasn't together, and there was just trying to see who was going to be the guy.
Yeah, I see that Wolf is taking out this SSL and put in a Neve.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he did. He took it out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I
An
don't
old
know.
Neve.
Huh?
Like an old Neve?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't know if it's exactly the one that Grohl had, or like not the same one, but
Yeah,
one like
yeah.
that era for sure.
Yeah,
It's
those,
for sure. That Elvis Basquette's his producer, so I think he has a Neve too. I think.
but that makes sense because, it's a tracking board.
Yeah, right.
That Neve is I would do it. Makes sense. I mean, I have Neves, and so the way I do it is like I have 1073s. I have SS, I have API sidecar,
Hmm.
and big sidecar, and then I have Helios, EMI. So I've got like the greatest mic pre's in the world,
Right.
and then and compressors, and I collect compressors. So it's really microphones, compressors, and mic pre's is really the ticket, and then the gear. It's all about going in,
Right, right, right. I've
So
seen your studio. I've seen your studio on some of the online videos, and
yeah,
of course your guitar collection I saw on the Gibson thing,
yeah.
which is
We
awesome.
just You should check out the new Sound on Sound.
Oh
There's
yeah.
John and I are on the cover.
Oh, killer.
We just did a whole thing about the recording, and there's pictures of my studio, some up there, and
Check it
yeah,
out.
it's cool. It's
Well, yeah,
cool.
there's that Ross did an article with Sound on Sound after I think it may be a year after the record came out, and I, of course, read through that whole thing,
Mhm.
and that the mix part of it. Were you involved every day on the mix, or
No,
okay? So Ross did most of that.
yeah, that's where things get a little tricky.
You know what? One of the guys that's been on here was one of the sources for all the tapes that you guys listened through. His name is Mike Wolf. He's a engineer in L.A. Mike Wolf sourced all the original people that had those tapes, board tapes, and he digitized all those tapes.
What do you mean all the board tapes?
So there was people around Roth and Ed in the early days that were recording off the early board tapes, like the stuff that you heard from the way before, like club days,
Oh,
before they were famous. And that stuff was all digitized at one point, and then Dweezil got in the middle of getting that stuff together, and then it ended up with Ed, and Mike went up to the studio with Ross at the time when they were doing some of the mixes. And Mike told a story, and I think there was another thing that they were thinking about putting out of like some early days recordings, maybe even some club day stuff that never was able to be mixed properly and put out. They didn't feel like it sounded good. I mean, Ross apparently didn't like the way it ended up. They
Ross
tried
or Roth?
Ross. Ross didn't like the way it sounded in the end, and I don't probably Roth didn't either. I mean, it's really old stuff, but it sounded great. Amazing.
I can't get in the middle.
And the mix, the stuff. Well, I appreciate you coming on here, man. This is an amazing album. I really think that this was a way to close that chapter of their career. I mean, to me,
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some stuff in the cans
Right, right.
It's
Well,
never come out.
that's being talked about. I don't know whether you know anything about the Steve Lukather connection, and
I don't know about that,
we'll
but
see. We'll see what happens with that.
I don't know about Luke, but there's definitely, you know, it's depends where or how far along the songs were, if whether it's, you know, Dave wrote on those songs or not. You know, I mean,
Right.
you can go, wow, here's an instrumental track, great. You know, but I mean, I think if you're going to put out like what you were just talking about, I think for fans, it's like, you know, it's like the Grateful Dead. Do they care? No.
Right.
Did anybody comment? You're the guy. Did anyone comment about all this stuff that just came out on YouTube? Like, well, the sound quality is not very, you know, no,
No,
nobody cares.
they loved it.
The only thing that bummed me out was you're in the middle of an eruption and somebody had the bright idea to turn the camera off.
Right. There's
Like,
that great part in the video where they're he's doing a killer solo and then it cuts to somebody's parents. Have you seen that? It's in there. It's hilarious. I'm like, oh my God, really?
all I know is when he's playing Eruption at the Garden,
Mhm.
and right before the tapping, they cut away.
Right, right. I think that's the one. That's what I'm talking about.
Like, ay, ay, ay. Are you
Uh,
kidding me?
that's amazing. Well, thanks
Well,
for
thanks.
spending time with me today, man. I really appreciate it. It was good to hang out with you at NAM and talk, and
Yeah.
I'll tell my buddy Damon that we got in touch and he'll get to see this video.
Yeah, sorry if we put you to sleep. Just watch us, Damon. We'll put you right to sleep.
He likes
Yeah,
all
well,
this
you know,
stuff.
listen, we get the privilege of talking about great art made by some of the most talented people, you know, in our lifetime. And so any small part that I can be a fly on the wall for, give any input, I'm happy to do it. And
I appreciate it.
I'm a fan too.
We appreciate that as fans, and I appreciate that you helped make this thing happen because this is a highlight of my life that year.
Oh yeah, me too. And
Right?
there's no doubt that the word legend uh, is rightly applied to them.
One more thing, Eddie as a person. Just I always try to bring Ed as a person. Just can you give me like a
That's you know, listening to Al's book, it put me right back to the warmth that Ed had. It's hard to say had, that he has. Uh, you know, he has that beautiful smile. He was always curious. He was always striving, and he was gracious and hard worker. But it didn't feel like work, you know, because if you do what you love, it doesn't feel like work. And it's just who he was. And the amount of love between he and Al was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. After every take, they would hug. They were always holding each other. They were always kissing, holding, and Wolf was right there. You know, they're just this three peas in a pod. You know, but he and Eddie, I mean Ed and Al, it's magical. It's magical. So that's Al calling right now. So I gotta go.
all right, buddy. Thank you so much, and I'll send you some links for those things that I told you about.
Please. All right,
All right.
pal. Good to
Thank you,
see you.
buddy. Have a good one. Thank you.